The flame at the top burned steadily, as if someone were fanning it with their palm, and the snow clung to the shadows of the walls, hesitating to descend into the valley. On the cliff, where the stone fortress stood above the clouds, women in gray cloaks taught people to dress wounds, share bread, and talk without shouting. They called it the simple science of life, and believed that even fire could not take it away. Hello to everyone listening. Please write in the comments where you are watching this video from, and I hope you enjoy listening. In the evening, when the gates were still standing, Maru was called the woman who was not afraid. So said those to whom she showed how to heat water over a low fire, how to dry herbs, how to wash a baby and an old man with equal care. She was from a southern village where 2 children had died of fever the previous winter, and she decided that she would not let anyone else die of thirst and fear. They called her a parfetta, although she herself said that the word was too heavy, and that it was enough that she had clean hands and a clear head. Yasaba walked beside her, thin as a vine, with quick fingers. She had learned to listen to breathing as if it were music, and could tell by the smell when grain had gone bad. Her mother had come to the fortress a year ago. Her mother asked that her daughters be given not only bread, but also knowledge, because knowledge has no weight and cannot be taken away by tax or sword. Her mother died before spring. Yasabo wore a piece of linen thread on her belt and said it was her memory. Below, in the city and surrounding villages, there was a strange noise. People in strange cloaks were pitching tents. They said they had come to serve the law and faith, that truth had been violated in the fortress, that bad grass had to be burned so that the field would be clean. The elders on the walls replied that bad grass does not grow in stone, only people, and it is better to treat them. But their words were drowned out by the drums and the neighing of horses. Mara drew up a duty roster. She decided in advance that she would not wait for hunger. She sent the boys to distant ravines for juniper, so that the smoke would be light and even, and the meat would keep longer. She asked the women to cut the bread thinner and put the crumbs in a common bag. She taught the men how to bandage each other so as not to pull on the knot on the infected area. They listened to her. Even those who whispered that women had no place at the wall came to her hearth at night and asked her to show them again how to hold the knife so as to cut away the rotten flesh without touching the living. That same month, when the moon was thick and yellow, a man with a northern accent came to the fortress. He carried a bag of skins on his belt, but the bag turned out to contain tools rather than fur. He said he knew how to set bones and draw out fever through bloodletting. His name was Remy. He didn't like to talk about himself. Mara noticed that he did not look people in the eye when they mentioned the war, and that he had an old scar on his arm that looked like a bird's beak. He offered his help and added that he would not charge for it. He said that a woman from these parts had once saved his life, and now he was repaying his debt. Mara nodded and said that debts have 2 masters, the one who owes and the one who accepts the debt. If both remain upright, no one falls. From that day on, Remy worked in a small room with a bright window. He taught how to hold a needle. He asked to boil the instrument in salt water, although many said it was a waste of salt. Yasabo did not argue and carried the water. Remy sometimes listened to her footsteps, as if the footsteps could also tell whether a person would recover or not. A boy named Barrow appeared and disappeared in the lower courtyard. He was considered a good-for-nothing because he got underfoot, brought wooden chips, and tried to build something on the edge of the well. He said he wanted to make a small winch to draw water faster. They chased him away, but he kept coming back. Mara once asked him to show her what he had in mind. He crossed two sticks, tied them with a rope, and showed how to turn them so that the rope would wind up. It didn't work well. The rope slipped, and the sticks creaked. But Mara didn't laugh. She brought a short plank, asked Barrow to tighten the knot differently, and suddenly the winch worked. The water rose easily. From that day on, 2 children were on duty at the well, and Donato, the old man who always coughed, said that now it was easier for him to wait. In the evening, someone whispered that the boy had turned out to be useful. The whisper sounded like surprise, but Mara heard something else in it. The habit of considering people superfluous. The siege dragged on. Rain fell rarely. Arrows flew frequently. Once, sacks of flour were brought from a neighboring village, as if it were a normal delivery. From above, everything looked peaceful. But one of the sacks had a mark that was unfamiliar here. It was the sign of a palm without a thumb. Remy saw this sign before anyone else. He said that he had once seen similar marks in the north, when they were transporting not flour, but lists of names. He asked that the sacks not be touched until they had been checked. This alarmed Maru. She told Barrow to bring clean water, and Yasabo to sprinkle some flour on the table, and see if there were any small bundles inside. In one of the sacks, closer to the bottom, they found a thin sheet of parchment hidden between layers of flour. The sheet had names and notes on it. No one read it aloud. Remy said he saw a sign of people who were not coming to heal. He said that someone down below really needed a fortress where the names would be called out. So a routine delivery turned into a danger. Mara said it was like a rotten loaf of bread. On the outside, the bread looks whole, but on the inside, it's already starting to taste bitter. They squeezed the bags and left only those without markings. Remy took the sheet to the fire and watched for a long time as the ink melted away. In those days, the fortress was held together by small things. Women dried wet sleeves over the coals. Men changed bandages. Children carried dry branches. Below, there was talk that the fire was closer than it seemed. People in strange cloaks whispered by the fires. They were looking for those who could speak 2 languages, the language of the mountains and the language of fear. One day at dawn, a white flag was raised. A man came to the wall with a parchment. He said that the hand holding this parchment held the law. He said that if the fortress handed over those who taught without permission, everyone else would be allowed to leave. He said that if there was no surrender,
fire would come. Mara listened to the retelling. She asked how many categories of good deeds there were. She was told that for some, good deeds are divided into useful and useless. Mara said that useful deeds are not always immediately apparent. Sometimes it is the inability to name the name that will come. She went to Remy. Remy said he knew how such conversations could end. He said that once he stood in a circle of burning bundles and heard the people around him stop shouting. He said that then a woman from the south led him out of there, and he searched for her for many years but never found her. Mara listened silently. That night, Barrow disappeared. They searched for him in the yard. They found him at the lower gate, where there was a narrow passage in the wall, behind which was a rock. 3 wooden wheels and a skein of rope lay nearby. Mara realized that he had made some kind of new lever. Barrow pointed to the crack and the rope. He motioned for her to climb down a little lower, where the rock disappeared under the snow. Remy examined the spot and said that there might be a stream bed that had been covered by snow in winter. He said that if they cleared it, they would have a narrow descent. Barrow nodded. Mara realized that the boy had spent a lot of time here alone. He tried to secure the rope, trying to figure out if the rock would hold. They thought he was useless, but he did work that the adults didn't notice. While the men argued that it was madness, Yasabo brought 3 pouches of dried herbs, 2 thin scrolls of parchment, and a small leather bag of smooth stones. She said that was all they needed to take with them if they had to. She listed herbs to teach how to treat simple ailments, sheets with brief instructions on how to share bread in times of need, stones for children so they would not forget how to count. She added that memory was easier to carry when it had objects. Mara nodded. Remy said that every descent had an end, and that they had to decide in advance who would go. In the lower days, closer to the full moon, a woman came from the camp below. She came as a salt merchant. She had a bag hanging from her shoulder, and on her sleeve was the same sign of a palm without a thumb, only embroidered with thread of the same color as the fabric. It was easy to miss. She asked to meet with Mara. She was brought in. The woman said that she had heard about the Maras of this region in her youth, and that once one of them had taken her child and saved him. She said that now this child had grown up and was standing below with strangers because they told him he had to. She said she had not come to propose an exchange, but to repay a debt. Tomorrow, a squad that could read tracks would be standing at the gate. She said that if people were to be let down, it should be done before dawn, and they should not walk along the stream, but along the edge where the snow was thinner, because there were fewer cracks there. She said she was not asking for payment, only that they not forget that she had once been saved. She left without giving her name. Mara realized that debt comes back in strange ways. She told Remy that women sometimes hold a net that others cannot see, and that today the net had shifted toward the fortress.
Remy replied that debt sometimes goes around in circles on the same stone. He added that if those who read tracts came in the morning, they would have little time. Mara had to decide what the treasure of learning was. Some believed it was silver and bowls. Others said it was books and words. Mara said that the treasure was a way of living so that no child in any village would be afraid to drink water. She said that treasure could not be hidden in a chest, but could be carried in people's memories if people came. She decided that Yasabo should go down because her memory was clear and her hands were strong. She decided that Barrow would go with her because he knew the way, and that the third would be someone who could carry heavy loads in silence. Remy said he would go. Mara looked at his scar. She thought that the circle was complete when a person went to the place where he had once been saved by another. The wind was steady at night. The snow crunched. Barrow tied the rope to a rock that seemed reliable. Remy checked the knot. Yasabo hid the sheets under her clothes, put the herbs in a bag on her chest, and the pebbles in her sleeve, closer to her palm. She said that it would be easier for the children to remember the numbers if they had something in their hands. Mara said that every step should be quiet, and that no one should look down for too long. She added that if they saw footprints below, they should walk on the rock, not the snow, and that footprints disappear faster on rock. They began their descent. The women stood at the top and remained silent. The men breathed heavily, trying not to disturb them. Someone was crying. Remy walked first, checking each ledge with his foot. Yasabo followed him, clutching the pebbles in her fingers as if they were not numbers, but a pulse. Barrow walked behind because he remembered where the rock was slippery. They stopped several times. From below, they could hear rare voices, like the pricks of the wind. Halfway down, there was a slight crack. An ice floe was breaking between two rocks. Mara at the top felt her fingers tremble, but the rope held. They reached a ledge, beyond which a path began along a narrow cornice. There the snow was thin, just as the strange woman had warned. They moved sideways, pressing themselves against the rock. Behind the rock was a black void. When they reached the shadow of the rock below, Remy raised his hand. He listened. He said he could hear water. That meant there was a stream under the snow nearby. He signaled to go where it was louder. They went. It was darker down below than it had been above, but the air seemed milder. Barrow pointed to a rock with a hoof print on it. The mark was old and faded. That was reassuring. They walked a little further and entered a spruce forest. The shadows covered them completely. At that moment, someone in the fortress noticed movement below. A small fire flashed and went out. Someone said it was one of the strangers' night fires. Someone said it was eyes. Mara said that eyes come in different shapes. She hoped that those who read tracts were looking the other way tonight. In the morning, smoke was raised in the fortress to hide the courtyard. Bags were brought and placed against the wall, as if in preparation for an exchange. The women bustled about the well. Barrow no longer tugged at their sleeves. Mara tried to go about her day as usual, even though she knew today was not a normal day. She sliced bread with a knife, and the crumbs fell into a bag. She stirred herbs, and the smell of bitterness filled the room. She told herself to speak briefly and act precisely. She went around to the sick. She stopped at a young warrior whose legs smelled of iron and rot. Remy had said yesterday that if they didn't find a way to bring down the fever, the man wouldn't survive. But Remy was already gone. Mara remembered how he had shown her where to look for a vein. She did what he had taught her. She asked the boy to hold the bowl. She counted the stones lying in a row on the shelf and removed one so that her memory would keep the rhythm of her hand. The fever receded for a while. By noon, news arrived. Traces had been found below. Someone said they were ermine tracks. Someone replied that an ermine does not carry grass and parchment. The guard at the far passage was removed. By evening, people in black cloaks were brought to the walls. They stood like a fence in a field. They said nothing. This made the fortress even quieter. Remy, Yasabo, and Barrow reached the old ravine where stone for furnaces had once been dried. It was dry there, and the walls rose evenly, like laid boards. Remy said they could wait it out here. He said that in the morning the wind would blow from the east, and the tracks under the stone would disappear before those under the fir tree. He lit a small, smokeless fire in a hollow in the wall. Yasabo took out the sheets. She unfolded one and ran her finger along the lines. She quietly recited each line to herself, as if storing them in separate memory cells. She taught the children in the fortress the same way. First the finger, then the word, then the image. Barrow twirled one of his wooden wheels in his hands. He said he wanted to make wheels in the fortress for a machine that would pull stones uphill instead of people. He said he hadn't succeeded. Remy replied that failures were like a quiet rain that made the earth softer. He said that it was easier to pull roots out of soft earth. Barrow fell asleep, holding the wheel in his palm. At dawn, they heard voices. Remy put his palm to the ground and said that a small group was approaching. He said that these were people who knew how to read tracks. He told them not to move and to wait. But they couldn't wait. There was only a narrow path leading down, and only their path from yesterday leading up. Remy said that a head-on escape was always noticeable. He said they had to split up. Yasabo wanted to object, but he raised his hand. He said that their tracks from the evening had mixed with animal tracks, and that if they carried the sheets and grass one at a time, they would have a better chance. He added that a child's foot touches the ground differently, and that Barrow would be better off walking without any weight. Yasabo took the parchments, Barrow took nothing, and Remy took the grass. They spread out like rays from a single stone. Meanwhile, in the fortress, they were discussing the exchange, which had been brought up again the day before. A man with clean hands and a chain around his neck arrived. He said that if there was a return, the fire would not rise above the ankles. He said that otherwise, he promised a bonfire that no one here had ever seen. His retelling made many lower their eyes. The elders argued quietly. Mara listened. She said that exchanges always turn a blind eye to debts that are not on the list. She said that if they gave up the teachers today, tomorrow they would give up those who knew how to listen to water. She added that the people below do not stop when they get what they asked for. They just start asking for something new. By evening, the boy from the patrol returned. He said they found an empty hearth near the ravine. He said there were children's footprints and adult footsteps nearby. He said the tracks continued on to the fir trees and the stone riverbed. He said those below were already confusing the trails. Mara exhaled slowly. She realized that today was not over yet. At night, the messenger returned with a note. It contained only 2 words: East Wind. That was enough for Mara. She said that now they had to prepare a backup plan for those who remained. She asked the old mason to give her 2 men and a short hoe. She led them to the place where Barrow had secured the rope yesterday. She said that every path must have a second angle. On the 3rd day, after the descent to the fortress, a man with a northern accent and a warm raincoat arrived. His face was hidden under a hood. He asked to meet with the person who distributed meals. It was Mara. He said he had heard the name Remy down below. He said that he once had a brother who went to war and never returned. He said that his brother wrote that he had met a woman from the south who taught him to hold a needle more firmly than a sword. He said that a year ago he found his brother's grave and knew from the marks that he had died from fire, not iron. He said that now he wanted to do something to repay his brother's debt. He took off his hood. Mara saw Remy's eyes, only younger. The man said his name was Adalric, and he had a pass for people who needed to leave the camp at night, as if they were carrying tools. Mara realized that the debt was not owed by one person or 2, but by a whole circle of people. She said that tonight she needed 1 pass for 1 person who should not go with the fire. She thought about the woman who had supposedly come with salt, about the children's footsteps by the ravine, about the rope on the rock, about the leaves under her clothes. She realized that the network held by women was stronger than chainmail. That same evening, in the fortress, someone bandaged the wound of a man who had believed all his life that women had no place at the wall. He pretended not to notice who was holding the bandage, but then he brought a piece of the best meat to Mara's hearth. He tried to put it down silently, but his hand trembled. Mara said nothing. She just cut the meat into even slices, as she had taught everyone. By nightfall, a sign came from Yasabo. She sent a small bag of stones through a boy from a neighboring village. It was a sign that she had arrived. 2 stones were missing from the bag. Mara realized that 2 children had already begun to learn to count where they had stopped. She realized that the treasure was already working without her. The morning brought cold and noise into the fortress. Below, they began to move the forest. People in black cloaks pulled bundles, which they used to make fires for others. Inside the fortress, it suddenly became very clear what would happen next. Someone began to pack their things. Someone stopped talking. Mara went to the room with the window where Remy worked. She found his knife, needle, and bowl for hot water. She carefully laid everything out on the table. She told herself that this was also treasure, but it would remain here because someone had to finish what had been started. By noon, new news arrived. A man with a seal had arrived at the camp below. He brought a list. He said he would name those who were expected in the square. He said that in exchange for these names, everyone else would be allowed to leave without persecution. The people in the fortress listened silently to the retelling. Some looked at the ground. Some looked at the sky. Mara thought that lists always smelled the same, of ink and fear. She went to Adalric. She said she had a name for the pass. She named the woman who had carried water last and taken bread last her whole life. She was a simple woman from the lower courtyard. She walked quietly and sewed sleeves for teenagers. No one noticed her. Her name was Elna. She had been sick in the chest for a long time, but every day she came to the well and helped those who were weaker. Mara said that Elna should not go to the fire. Adalric nodded. He made a note on a narrow piece of parchment. He said that at night there would be a man at the northern tent who would look away in the right direction. He added that this was all he could do. In the evening, Mara met with women who knew how to talk to children and men who knew how to keep quiet. She said that night was the time to choose what was more important: a word on the list or a hand at the well. She added that those who leave will carry on simple rules: boil water, share bread, don't shout at first. She repeated that treasure is a way of life. They parted, keeping simple but strong steps in mind. At the end of the night, another line appeared. The old mason, whom Mara had asked to help with the passage, said he had found a fallen stone. Behind it was a narrow twilight. He said that if you crawled sideways, you could get to a ledge from where you could see the distant path. Mara asked how many people could pass. The mason spread his arms. He said he didn't know. He added that this passage had once been closed because goats often fell there. Mara decided that it would be easier for goats than for people today, and that there was risk everywhere. While they were preparing Elna's exit, Remy arrived. He was covered in dust, and his knuckles were broken. He said that he, Yasabo, and Barrow had reached the first village, where they were sheltered by a miller whose wife had given birth to twins yesterday. He said that Yasabo had left 2 stones and a pen there and taught the woman how to boil knives. He said that Barrow had stayed in the carpenter's barn because he had seen a wheel there and now would not leave. He said he had to return because people who remembered his face had appeared in the camp below. He added that once in the north, the eyes of a man in black had seemed familiar to him, and today he had seen those same eyes. Mara asked why he had returned. Remy replied that duty leads you to where you can still be useful. Mara realized that there were too many coincidences in this story to be considered a coincidence. She cautiously said that if they started calling names today, she would feel more comfortable if someone who knew how to hold a torch tightly stood by the fire. Remy understood what she was talking about. He said he was ready to stand if it would keep the others from panicking. He added that he didn't want to look at the fire, but he could stand nearby. The first flame was lit the next morning. It was carefully assembled. The people in black cloaks did everything methodically. The list was read evenly. The usual words about law and order were heard. Someone said it was better to obey. Someone replied that it was better not to betray. Mara stood in the corner of the courtyard and counted her steps silently. She held a small bone needle in her pocket. The needle was sharp. It reminded her that every deed is done with the hands. When they reached the middle of the list, a man with a round face and an uncertain gait appeared. He was a clerk from the headquarters below. He stopped at the gate and asked for water. They gave it to him. He began to drink greedily, water running down his chin. He suddenly said that he was from a place where people liked to talk about duty and honor, but most of all they liked to lower their eyes at the end. He said that yesterday he had been given a new list. He said that on the list was the name of a woman from the South whom he had seen many years ago. He said that this woman had given him bread when he had neither a word nor money, and that he had then promised himself that if he met her, he would take at least one step in the opposite direction. He said he didn't know if she was alive. He asked Mara for a piece of coal and a sheet of paper. Mara gave it to him. The scribe quickly began to write, then whispered that 2 people downstairs were ready to mix up the names in 3 places if given the signal. He added that this was all he could do, because he knew nothing else but letters. Mara nodded. She said that sometimes letters were a rope that could be thrown down. In the evening, confusion began with the names. Someone noticed that one name was repeated twice. Someone said that one man who was definitely in the fortress was missing from the list. The people in black cloaks whispered among themselves. They began to recount. Mara realized that they had a short pause. She sent Elna to the northern tent with Adalric's pass. Elna stood up straight, though she was breathing heavily. Downstairs, a man with a spear stopped her. He looked at the pass. He said everything was fine. He stepped aside. Elna walked through. Her hands were shaking, but her step was steady. Meanwhile, at the second passage, the old mason led 3 more men. They walked sideways, scraping their shoulders against the wall. One of the men cried out in pain. The mason said they could cry, but quietly. They reached the ledge and saw the distant path. The shadow of night already lay there. They followed it as if it were a thread. All this time Mara walked among the people, as if connecting different ends. She checked where everyone was lying, what they were holding, where they were looking. She saw Remy standing by the fire, holding his arms in front of him, so that someone else could hide their face behind his shoulder. She noticed that the people next to him were breathing more evenly. She remembered how he talked about the circle of duty. She thought that the circle was not only a return, but also a bond that held them together. In the second half of the night, a messenger arrived at the fortress from the miller's village. He delivered a short message. The woman from the south, the one who had once saved Remy in the north, was Yasabo's mother. He said they had learned this from a note hidden in an old bag of lavender. There was a sign that Yasabo wore at her waist, and words that her daughter should keep the knowledge because the world takes not only bread from women, but also the ability to make the world quieter. Mara sat down on a rock. She stared at her palms for a long time. She realized that the hidden kinship, which many spoke of as a coincidence, had in fact been following its own path for a long time. Life had bound people together so that duty would return home. She understood that Remy, saved by a woman from the south, was now saving her daughter and her cause. It was a knot that was not invented for beauty, but grew out of simple steps. By morning, the list had been raised again. The people in black cloaks were tired. They began to make mistakes. They repeated the name of a man who had already left through the second passage. They did not notice that Elna's place by the well was empty. They did not see two teenagers slip into the far passage in the shadow of an old linden tree. They were busy with the fire and keeping order. When the fire reached the first bundle higher than usual, a groan passed through the fortress. But then the air became somehow clearer. People suddenly began to move at a different speed. They realized that the end could be not only in the fire, but also in what would go beyond it. Mara gathered the remaining herbs and divided them into 3 piles. She said that one pile would remain here until the end. The second would go with those who would go through the stone passage, and the third would become smoke to hide the movements of the others. She divided them so that each pile contained herbs for heat, herbs for wounds, and herbs that soothe. She thought that balance could also be divided into piles. At noon, a new danger arrived, simple as an everyday object. A cart with straw, which was supposed to bring bedding for the stables, entered the fortress. The cart was searched as if it were a routine inspection. Suddenly, a quiet, metallic sound was heard from the straw. Inside was a short hook with a chain. A small iron hammer lay nearby. These were tools for breaking in. Mara realized that those below had decided to force open one of the side passages. She said that they had to remove everything that glistened and extinguish the fire in the passage they had prepared themselves so as not to attract attention. She realized that simple straw had become a weapon in the hands of strangers. An everyday detail had turned into a threat. It was yet another act in which the peaceful courtyard was transformed into a path of danger. They dismantled the cart, took the straw to a distant barn, and hid the hook in a well, tying a rope to it so they could retrieve it later. They pretended that nothing had happened. Towards evening, a random trifle almost ruined everything. The boy who carried water dropped one of the Yasabo stones that Mara kept as a token. The stone rolled and hit the iron. The sound was like a bell. The man in black turned his head. He took a step. But then Adalric approached him and started talking about deliveries. He began counting the bags aloud. pointing to different rows with a parchment. He distracted him just long enough for the pebble to be picked up and hidden. Mara later told herself that sometimes life depends on someone else's dry talk about supplies and roads. By nightfall, it was clear that the fire would be higher tomorrow. The list grew shorter. Those who remained began to say goodbye silently. Mara walked around the courtyard, touched the shoulders of those who were sleeping, adjusted the bandages of those who were moaning, and placed tight knots of cloth under their heads so that their necks would not break. She laid out Remy's needles, knives, and clean strips of cloth on the table. She sat and breathed evenly. She waited for a sign. The sign came unexpectedly simply. The old mason raised his finger. He said there was a new sound in the wall. He said the strangers had started picking at the stone in the wrong place. He said it would take them time. Mara realized they had one more night. That night, she gathered those who had stayed until the end. She said that everyone had a choice that neither the list nor the fire could take away. She said that they could stay here and remain calm until the very end. She said that they could leave through the stone passage and carry on the simple teachings of washing and silence. She added that they could go to the camp below and say that it was all a mistake and start a new life. She did not condemn any choice. She said that it was more important that the choice be made with open eyes. People sat and listened. They did not shout. They did not argue. They thought. By this time, Yasabo had already reached the second village. There she found a woman who had lost a child last winter and taught her to boil water before giving it to drink and to air out the house every morning. The woman listened and cried quietly. Yasabo wrote on the edge of the parchment that this village needed one clay jug and one clean cloth. She asked that this be taken to the fortress if anyone was going back. The note was brought to the fortress by a shepherd who sold cheese and did not like to look people in the eye. He gave it to Mara and said that the girl had asked him to add that the stones were all back in place. Mara smiled briefly. She placed the note next to the needles. On the last day, the one whom many considered an empty space and a stranger in the yard, Barrow, arrived. He returned from the carpenter's yard, where he had been learning to turn a wheel. He brought with him a small winch, made not of crooked sticks, but of straight wood. He said it was for the second passage, where those who had difficulty needed to be pulled up. He showed how to secure the axle, how to wind the rope, how to keep it from slipping. The men watched in silence. One said that the boy had done more today than a dozen adults. No one laughed anymore. Barrow stood next to Mara at the entrance to the passage and began to pull. A heavy man passed. A woman with a sore chest passed. An old man with a cough passed. The winch worked as if it had always been there. Mara realized that the underestimated boy had become the one on whose hands the exit depended. She thought that today there were fewer of the usual mistakes in this fortress. By evening, it became clear that there was no more time to delay. Adalric came and said that there would be a patrol tomorrow morning, and if they saw the emptiness by the well, they would start searching. He said he had done everything he could. He added that if anyone else passed through at night, they should go quietly and quickly. He said he could not give any more signals. Mara thanked him. She said that the burden had fallen evenly. Remy came over and said he was ready to go downstairs to distract them. He said he would go to the scribe's house and say that one of the patients had a fever and ask them to send a doctor. He said that if they recognized him, he would make noise somewhere else to give the second group enough time. Mara looked at him and thought that he might not come back. She didn't ask him to stay. She knew that people make their own choices. Otherwise, the choice doesn't stick. At night, the winch creaked for the last time. The rope burned her palms for the last time. The last person passed by and disappeared into the darkness. Mara stayed at the entrance and covered the stone. She did it as if she were closing the eyes of a child who had fallen asleep. She touched the wall and said to herself, "That stone holds memories better than paper." In the morning, the fire came, as promised. It was tall and clear. People stood nearby and breathed evenly. Some prayed in their own words, some remained silent. Mara stood in the middle of the courtyard. Her hands were clean. She held a small needle and placed it on the stone. She did it calmly, as she always put needles away after work, so that other hands could take them. She looked at those who remained and nodded to each of them. She did not try to say beautiful words. She knew that simple words had already been said and were already working somewhere below, where children held smooth pebbles in their hands and counted to 10 without mistake, where women boiled water and dried cloth in the wind, where men changed bandages and did not pull knots until they hurt. In the camp below, the scribe found a way to delay the burning bundles for a few minutes. He pretended to have mixed up the numbers. He said the list needed to be checked. At that moment, a small group passed by on the distant path. An old man with a cough, a woman with a sore chest, 2 teenagers, and Elna, who was still breathing heavily, but holding herself upright. They were led by a mason who knew how to listen to the wall. They were accompanied by a boy who had once been an empty space, but had now become someone who knew where to put his feet. Yasabo was waiting for them in the shadows of the fir trees. She was holding parchments and a bag of stones in her hands. She looked up and saw that the circle had closed in a good place. Remy disappeared that day. Someone said they saw him go to the river, followed by 2 soldiers who wanted to arrest him. Someone said he jumped into the water, and the water took him in, as it takes in a person who always returns to where they started. No one knew for sure. Adalric stared at the water for a long time and said nothing. He thought that his brother's duty had now been fulfilled to the end. And yet it was not over, because he would still help someone else to cross. By evening, the fire had gone out. The stone remained warm. A small bone needle lay on it. It was found by a boy from the camp, the son of a woman who once came as a salt merchant. He picked up the needle and put it in his pocket. He didn't know why he needed it. He just felt that it was an object that could be passed on. Days and weeks later, Yasabo came to the 3rd village. There was no well there, and people drew water from a stream that dried up in the summer. She taught them to dig a shallow pit nearby and cover it with flat stones. She said the water would be cleaner that way. She wrote a short note on how to make a simple swing from 2 boards and a rope, and remembered Barrow. She smiled. She thought that the boy with the winch might one day teach others how to make wheels. And that would be a treasure too. They walked on. With them went simple rules, herbs that smelled of bitterness and hope, and the memory of people who remained on the stone. They did not wear emblems or carry seals. They simply held in their hands the things that made life sustainable. Somewhere in the mountains, a shepherd said he saw a man with a northern accent walking along the trail at night, and the wind was quieter around him. And in one town, a scribe suddenly began to make his students wash their hands before picking up a pen, and some laughed while others remembered. Time passed, which people don't like to count in days, because the days are all the same. Somewhere, children survived, because their mothers knew how to heat water and not let them drink from puddles. Somewhere, a wounded man did not die, because his friends knew how to bandage him and not pull the knot. Somewhere, a new well raised the water higher than before, and no one remembered the words about great plans. People just did small things that were worth more than loud speeches. So the fortress ended, but not the knowledge. The knowledge descended on a rope held by a boy, crossed the ravine in the arms of a woman with a sick breast, hid in a bag of pebbles with a girl who knew how to listen to breathing. It passed through people who were considered empty, and through those who seemed like strangers. It did not like loud names. It liked warm water, dry hands, and a steady voice. Neither a list nor fire could take it away, because it is impossible to remove it from the mind. Mara stood calmly in her final hour. She knew that the choice had been made. She knew that those who had left would carry on what she had lived for. She knew that everyone who had touched a needle, a knife, grass, a stone, or a wheel today was now connected to other hands. It was a circle not of iron, but of deeds, and this circle held tighter than any chain. In the evening, when the wind died down, in a distant house, a woman placed a clay bowl on the table and said that she now had a new habit: boiling water twice. She said it simply, as if she were talking about the weather. Nearby, a child counted the pebbles from a bag and made no mistakes. The man went out into the yard, where a thin rope hung with clean cloths hanging on it. He looked at the mountains and thought that where the fire had been high, it would now be quieter. He didn't know why he thought that. It was just that the air was calm that evening, and on the old cliff, the snow melted late from the shadows of the walls. The stone cooled slowly, but on one stone, there was a small, smooth area left by the needle. No one noticed it. However, everyone who later put their palm there said that the stone was slightly warm. People explained this by the sun. Some added that the stone remembers. This explanation was quite simple and accurate. This simplicity was the treasure that was lost in the night. And so, even when new winters came and new people argued about words, the villages below lived a little differently. They shouted less. They washed their hands more often. They divided bread equally. They counted stones to 10 and beyond. They chose between fear and action, and more often chose action. This was the justice that could not be taken away by a list, and could not be justified by fire. It was the decision of people who made their own choice.